My mother disguised a family dinner as a fertility ambush. She pulled out a syringe, eyes gleaming. Daniela held me down. I screamed as hormones pierced my thigh. I trusted them once. Now I was strapped to a hospital bed with detectives asking questions. Last week, my mother was banned from the ICU. Her punishment had begun. But this wasn't over, it was just exposed. Since I was 8, Mom forced Daniela and me to wear pregnancy suits. I fought it, she doubled the weight. Daniela played along, rocking a baby doll. Every night was childbirth class. I used textbooks to escape, she used them as pillows. Daniela begged to be a surrogate by 16. Mom called her perfect. I was defective. I watched my sister become Mom's angel, while I planned my exit in the shadows of anatomy diagrams. At 12, I hid my period for weeks. Mom said menstruation meant ready. Daniela celebrated hers with a fertility cake. I flushed mine, terrified. Mom caught me, slapped my face, then made me sit through surrogacy contracts. Daniela read them like bedtime stories. Our mother said we were born to give. I wanted to run. That night, I carved law school into my desk drawer. It was the first rebellion I ever committed, silent, but defiant. When I got into Columbia Law, Mom stopped speaking to me. Daniela said I was being selfish. They hacked into my school email, marked me as mentally unstable. My dean questioned my enrollment. I fought to stay. Daniela dropped off hormone vials, said Mom called them insurance. I poured them down the drain. Days later, my dorm was raided, my name linked to illegal surrogacy ads. I cried in front of the raw. She called me unstable too. After I passed the bar, I changed my number. Mom showed up at my job with flowers and a court summons. You owe me grandchildren, she whispered. Daniela filed for emergency guardianship over me, citing delusions. They used my childhood journal as evidence. I panicked, cut off social media. Then, my boss received photos of me at Planned Parenthood. Anonymous threats followed. The Her department launched a review. I had to prove I wasn't mentally compromised. I went to court alone. Daniela sat across from me with fake bruises and tears. Mom testified I was unstable, prone to uterus-hating rage. I submitted medical records and therapist notes. The judge looked bored. Outside, reporters swarmed me. Headlines read, Annie motherhood lawyer faces family charges. I lost 2 clients that week. That night, I found a hidden tracker in my car. I couldn't breathe. Even my body was no longer private, it belonged to them. I confronted Daniela outside the courthouse. She trembled, then whispered. She said, you'd ruin everything. I asked, do you even want to be pregnant again? Her silence screamed. Mom yanked her away, hissing, we don't betray family. That night, Daniela texted me a clinic address. It wasn't Blessed Beginnings, it was another alias. I called the health board, they brushed me off. I wasn't just fighting Mom, I was fighting a network. And I was running out of time. At the hearing, I brought new evidence, clinic rosters, altered charts, Daniela's suppressed records. Mom wore pearls, eyes glassy. She smirked as my hands shook, presenting. Daniela refused to testify. The judge hesitated, then he ordered a recess. I slumped in the hallway, breath shallow. A journalist approached. You have proof? I nodded. Then don't stop now. My heart pounded. It wasn't over. I had one more chance to drag it into the light. I stormed into Blessed Beginnings posing as a patient. Kitten mitt clipped. Nerves raw. A receptionist offered surrogacy enhancement packages. I asked about egg donors. She handed forms with fake ids. I recorded everything. In the back room, I found Daniela's file, altered dates, missing consent. I slipped out, heart racing outside. I handed the footage to a state investigator. If this doesn't prove it, I said, nothing will. The footage aired. News anchors said forced fertility and family betrayal. Mom called me a traitor. Daniela disappeared. I received a cease and desist from the clinic's lawyers. But survivors reached out. One said, she did the same to me. Another mailed her medical files. I built a case still. No charges, no rest. I'd exposed the system. But it didn't crumble. That night, I cried over my law degree. It felt like a paper shield. At a conference, I spoke on reproductive coercion. A protester shouted, she hates mothers. My voice shook, then steadied. I hate forced motherhood, I replied. Applause broke out. Afterward, a senator's aide handed me a card. The committee's watching, hope flickered. That night, I saw Daniela's face in a documentary screenshot. She looked hollow, used. I promised myself, if I couldn't save her, I'd protect the next girl. No more silence, no more shame. I filed a civil suit. Mom countersued for defamation. In court she wept. Said I was possessed by hatred. Her lawyer claimed I endangered Daniela's mental health. I submitted medical evidence, therapist reports, audio from the clinic. The judge took it under review outside. Daniela waited in a car. We locked eyes. She looked away. I whispered, you don't have to live like this. She didn't respond, but she didn't drive off either. Verdict day, the judge ruled in my favor. Partial damages awarded, restraining order granted. Mom's face went blank. Daniela never showed. I stepped outside. Sunlight warm on my skin. The woman pressed a note into my hand. You gave me courage. I smiled, not because it was over, but because someone else might now speak. That was my win. That, and the silence Mom would finally hear. The courtroom door closed behind me. Heavy and final. A month later, I received an encrypted email. The sender, a former clinic nurse. Attached were logs, dozens of women labeled assets, dates, hormone doses, payout slips. My mother's initials appeared repeatedly. She wasn't just a pawn, she was recruiting. Daniela's name was on every second page. I've omitted. The betrayal wasn't passive, it was orchestrated. This wasn't about motherhood. It was about control and profit. My mother wasn't just complicit. She was architect of it all. I traced payment records. A shell company funneled donor fees through a nonprofit, Blessed Tomorrow. Mom was on the board. Daniela received stipends labeled wellness support. My sister wasn't just a victim, she'd benefited, or been paid to stay silent. I hesitated. Was she coerced or complicit? I dug deeper. A redacted contract bore her signature, agreeing to exclusive gestational services. It wasn't love, it was labor. My mother had brokered her womb like a commodity. Emma, Daniela's daughter, called me crying. Grandma says I'm next. My throat closed. She was only 8. I asked where Danielle was. Emma whispered with the doctors again. I promised to pick her up from school. When I arrived, the teacher hesitated. Your custody status. I showed my restraining order against Patricia. The teacher relented. Emma clung to me. Her backpack held prenatal vitamins. My rage burned. The cycle had crossed generations. It was time to sever it. I filed for emergency guardianship. Danielle contested it via proxy. In court, the judge questioned Emma's vitamin regimen. A pediatrician testified prescribed hormones had been delivered to their address. Patricia denied knowledge, but Emma spoke up. Grandma says babies are blessings. She calls me her little seed bank. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge ruled in my favor. Emma clutched my hand. That night, she slept in my apartment. Safe. I watched her breathe, trembling with relief. An anonymous source dropped a USB in my mailbox. Video files, hidden cameras inside blessed beginnings. Footage showed unconscious women, IV lines, and nurses marking checklists. One clip caught Patricia prepping an injection, whispering, she's fertile, ready for the next round. My stomach turned. This wasn't surrogacy, it was trafficking. I turned the footage over to federal investigators. Emma sat beside me, watching cartoons. I muted them. This wasn't a moment for joy, it was for war. Daniela resurfaced. Then shaking, she begged for Emma. She's all I have left, she sobbed. I demanded answers. Daniela admitted knowing some of it but not all. She said Mom convinced her it was noble. I asked, was Emma part of that nobility? Daniela collapsed. I offered her a deal, testify, and she could visit Emma under supervision as she agreed. Her statement cracked the case. She named names, but she also broke years of lies unraveling in one courtroom. Daniela's testimony revealed clinic donors were promised custom surrogates, young, malleable, family-trained. Prosecutors widened the case. A grand jury formed. Emma asked, will Grandma go to jail? I nodded gently. She should. That night, Emma asked to sleep in my bed. She gripped my hand and whispered, I don't want to be anyone's project. My chest tightened. This child born of coercion was reclaiming her voice. I kissed her forehead. You're no one's project. You're mine now. Federal subpoenas landed. Blessed beginnings shuttered overnight. Mom vanished. I checked Emma's school obsessively. Danielle was moved to a protected location. A whistleblower released names, judges, physicians, donors. The scandal reached headlines. Nationwide fertility fraud ring. I was both praised and blamed. Online trolls called me womb killer. Survivors called me hero at night. I reread Emma's school essay. My aunt is a lawyer who saves people. Her truth mattered more than any headline. That kept me going. I testified before Congress. Cameras flashed. One senator smirked. But surrogacy helps families. I responded, so does consent. Gasped. Daniela sat in the gallery, eyes downcast. My palms sweated. But I spoke about clinics, forged documents, hormones forced into girls. I used Mom's name. The room froze. No more shielding her. I walked out shaken but proud. That night, Emma drew a picture, me holding a sword labeled Truth. I hung it above my desk. It belonged there. Patricia was found in Utah, living under an alias Dr. Grace. She'd opened a holistic womb center. The buy rated it. Dozens of women were inside. Sedated, most undocumented. She smiled in handcuffs, unrepentant. I was helping, she insisted. Emma saw the footage. She's sick, she muttered. I didn't argue. That night I let her cut up Mom's picture. Tiny pieces fell like confetti. You're not her anymore. I said. Emma grinned. I never was. My heart exhaled. The trial began. Federal court. Cameras banned. Tension thick. Daniela testified first. Her voice cracked, describing injections, staged pregnancies. Mom's defense painted her as unstable. Claimed Emma was delusional. I took the stand last. I named institutions, showed contracts, played videos. The jury leaned forward. The prosecutor whispered, they're with us. Still, I shook all over. Emma waited in the hall, coloring. She handed me a page, a heart with scales inside. Justice, through a child's eyes. Mom tried to flip the narrative. My daughters betrayed me. The judge interrupted, citing her grooming history. She scoffed, unmoved. I raised them to serve life. The room fell silent. Survivors wept. The jury watched, stone-faced. Emma, unseen in the gallery, whispered, I'm not yours. Daniela clutched her. In that moment, bloodlines cracked. Love wasn't inherited, it was chosen. And none of us had chosen Patricia. The prosecutor looked at me and nodded. The spell had finally broken. The verdict: guilty on multiple counts, trafficking, medical fraud, abuse. Patricia didn't flinch. Daniela cried silently. Emma squeezed my hand. Outside, a crowd gathered. Survivors, as protesters. Some cheered, others glared. I spoke briefly. This wasn't justice. It was exposure. Justice begins now. Reporters shouted. I walked away. At home, Emma made cupcakes. Celebration, she asked. I nodded. For truth, we lit one candle. Not for her birthday, but for the life she reclaimed. That flame felt sacred. A documentary aired. Womb Wars, the Gonzalez case. I watched with Emma. She gasped, seeing Daniela and Ibs, me yelling in court. Patricia smirking. They made me a movie, she whispered. I corrected her. We told our truth. Schools called, asking for guest lectures. Survivors formed a coalition. We published a legal guide. One girl emailed, because of you I left. Emma drew again. 3 women holding hands under a rising sun. She titled it Survivors. Daniela moved nearby. We rebuilt slowly. Coffee, therapy, silent walks. She started painting again. One afternoon she handed me a canvas. Emma, surrounded by sunflowers, no syringes in sight. She's safe, Danielle whispered. I hugged her. We weren't healed, but we were healing. That night, Emma asked if we'd always live together. I said, as long as you want. She smiled. I want forever. For the first time, forever didn't feel like a threat. It felt like hope. Congress passed the Reproductive Autonomy Act. Clinics now required consent audits, trauma reporting, and third-party oversight. The president mentioned our case during the signing. I wept. Emma asked, is that justice? I answered, it's a start. Survivors gathered for a vigil. We lit candles for those lost to silence. Daniela read a poem. Emma held her hand. You're strong, she said. In her eyes, I saw what we had become, not victims, not martyrs. We were witnesses. The last time I saw Mom, it was on a prison screen. You ruined the legacy, she hissed. I stared back. No, I rewrote it. Her eyes lost their shine. I ended the call outside. Emma waited with ice cream. Did she say sorry? I shook my head. She never will. Emma took my hand. That's okay. We're free anyway. And for the first time, I believed it. Not just in words but in my bones. After the verdict, I stopped checking over my shoulder. I deleted the burner phones. Emma's laugh filled our apartment like music. Daniela baked again. I touched my law diploma, no longer a shield, but a tool. When Emma whispered, "Thank you for saving me," I replied, "You saved me too." Healing wasn't loud. It was soft, slow, stitched into pancakes and bedtime stories. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. That was everything. I spoke at Emma's school for career day. I fight for rights, I said. A girl asked, "Even against your mom?" I paused, especially then. The room hushed. Later, a teacher pulled me aside, tears in her eyes. "You gave them language." I walked home lighter. Emma grinned. "You're famous." I laughed. "I'm yours," she nodded. Forever, forever, and that word no longer hurt. It rang with purpose. Love chosen, legacy rewritten. On Emma's 10th birthday, we visited the courthouse. She asked to see the judge's bench. One day she whispered, "I'll sit here." My eyes welled. Daniela clapped softly. We gifted Emma a gavel engraved "Your voice matters." She kissed it. At night, she placed it beside her bed. "To protect dreams," she said. That gavel wasn't just wood, it was her future. And I would defend it with everything I had. 2 years later, Patricia's pearl was denied. Daniela testified again, firmer this time. She doesn't regret it. The judge agreed. Media outlets stopped calling. Emma's school named a scholarship after me for girls who speak. I cried when they unveiled the plaque. Finally, justice wasn't just punishment, it was prevention and hope, planted in young hearts. Emma started a blog at 12, No More Secrets. Survivors commented daily. She answered everyone. Daniela ran art workshops for healing. I mentored young lawyers. We became a team, not of blood, but of choice. When people asked if we were a family, I said, absolutely, because we chose each other. And in that choosing, we found something stronger than survival: belonging. Years from now, when Emma argues her first case, I'll be in the front row. Daniela will paint the courtroom. We'll wear sunflower pins, our quiet rebellion. I'll whisper, "You did it." She'll smile, steady and fierce. Not a project, not a victim, a lawyer, a leader, a legacy of her own. And I'll know the cycle didn't just end. We shattered it.